The forgotten murder of Alicia Navarro. It started like a missing person case. A 14-year-old girl vanished in the middle of the night. No forced entry, no signs of struggle, no real answers, just silence, and a trail that would take over 4 years to surface, only to unravel something far more sinister than anyone imagined. This isn't just a story about a runaway teenager. It's a tale of systemic neglect, manipulation, and murder cloaked under layers of privilege and racial invisibility. And what if I told you the system knew all along? Stay with me. Alicia Navarro was last seen on September 15, 2019, in Glendale, Arizona. She was autistic, sweet, and deeply introverted. According to her mother, Alicia had a structured life, safe, predictable. Her routines were sacred, and any disruption would cause emotional meltdowns. But one morning, her bedroom window was open. A note was left behind. It read, "I ran away. I will be back. I swear. I'm sorry." But she never came back. The police response? Textbook indifference. They treated her disappearance as a typical teenage rebellion, another runaway case not worth urgent attention. Her Latina background? Barely mentioned in media coverage. No Amber Alert. No statewide search parties. Just a mother, Jessica Nunez, crying into local news cameras, begging someone, anyone, to care. But Alicia's story faded until 4 years later. Montana, July 2023. A young woman walks into a local police station in a small, unnamed town near the Canadian border. She says she's Alicia Navarro. She's older now, thinner, paler, worn down. Her eyes constantly scan the room. Her hands tremble uncontrollably. She tells the officers she wants to be removed from the missing persons list. She insists she hasn't been hurt, that she's been safe. But nothing about her seems safe. She's escorted out of the station. The man she was living with, a recluse, twice her age, known for online radical posts and anti-government rants. The neighbors claimed they thought she was his daughter, but they'd never heard her speak. One mentioned seeing her rarely, only ever at night. Police said she was not being held against her will, but the way she avoided eye contact, flinched at loud noises, and refused to answer direct questions painted another story entirely. Then came the contradictions. Alicia's mother flew to Montana. Their reunion? Cold. Alicia stood behind officers, refused to hug her mother, wouldn't speak Spanish, wouldn't smile. Something was broken. When Jessica tried to ask her what happened, Alicia only whispered, "I can't tell you. I'm sorry." That's when things took a darker turn. Journalists began digging, and what they found suggested that this wasn't a case of a teenage girl simply running away. It was a grooming case, one of the worst in recent history. Alicia had been lured by someone online. A man pretending to be a teenage boy. Someone who used her autism and isolation to manipulate her, until she believed he was her only safe space. When she left that night in 2019, she wasn't just running away. She was walking into a trap. Authorities eventually confirmed the man she was living with in Montana had a history of online grooming under fake identities. But strangely, they didn't charge him. No trafficking charges, no kidnapping, nothing. Why? Because Alicia insisted she wasn't forced to stay. Even though she was underage when she left. Even though she was mentally vulnerable. Even though she was, by all legal definitions, unable to consent. The legal system didn't pursue justice. It buried it. But the public? They weren't silent. Outrage exploded online. Advocates pointed out the double standard. If Alicia were white, blonde, middle class, would it have been handled the same way? Would the system have called her just a runaway? Or would they have treated it like what it really was? A calculated abduction, a grooming case turned psychological captivity? Many began drawing parallels with other cases like J.C. Dugard or Elizabeth Smart. Except those victims were rescued. Their captors imprisoned. Their stories headlined. Alicia's story? It was swept under the rug. But there was one final twist. In an independent interview, a former social worker who had briefly been assigned to Alicia's case in 2021 came forward anonymously. She claimed that internal memos suggested law enforcement knew she had been spotted in Montana as early as 2022. But because she didn't appear to be in distress, they didn't intervene. She ended the interview with a chilling statement. "We don't save girls like Alicia. Not when they're brown, not when they're poor, and not when their trauma isn't convenient to headline." So, what really happened to Alicia Navarro? Was she groomed and held in psychological captivity for 4 years? Did the system fail her, not once, but repeatedly? And more importantly, how many more Alicias are still out there, waiting to be found? When Alicia Navarro's story finally broke through the media silence in 2023, the focus quickly shifted from the missing girl to the man who had controlled her life for nearly 4 years. A predator who used the darkest corners of the internet to hunt his victims. But unraveling his identity was far from simple. This wasn't just a case of one criminal. It was a disturbing glimpse into a shadow network thriving on privilege, anonymity, and systemic blind spots. His name was Eric Mallory, or rather, one of many names. To law enforcement, Eric was a ghost, constantly changing his online persona, IP addresses, and locations. To Alicia, he was the only person she trusted. He called himself Jason in chat rooms, posing as a kind, troubled teenager who understood her like no one else did. Eric was in his early 40s, living in a modest suburban home in Montana. Neighbors described him as quiet, a bit odd. But no one suspected the darkness beneath his calm exterior. To the online world, he was a master manipulator. So how did Eric trap Alicia? It started in a seemingly innocent online forum dedicated to autism support groups. Posing as a young person with similar struggles, Eric quickly gained Alicia's trust by mimicking her interests and fears. He knew the signs, the loneliness, the craving for acceptance, and weaponized them. Gradually, his messages became more personal, more insistent. He offered her an escape from her family's strict routines, promising freedom and understanding. And when Alicia reached out, desperate for connection, Eric was waiting. When Alicia left home in 2019, she wasn't abducted in the traditional sense. Eric didn't chain her or lock her in a basement. Instead, he isolated her mentally. He convinced her that her family didn't love her, that the police were out to get her, and that only he could protect her. This is where the law's failure began. They struggled to categorize Alicia's situation as either kidnapping or voluntary absence. For years, Eric controlled Alicia's world, cutting her off from family, monitoring her every interaction, and grooming her into obedience. In Montana, he kept her under strict rules. No phone, no internet, no outside contact. But because Alicia never screamed for help, never tried to escape physically, police called it a consensual relationship between two adults. This legal gray zone is what made the case so controversial. Was Alicia truly free to leave? Did the law properly protect a vulnerable autistic minor trapped in psychological captivity? Experts say no. Dr. Helen Marks, a clinical psychologist specializing in trauma and coercive control, explains, "Coercive control is invisible to many people, especially law enforcement trained to look for physical restraints or violence. Victims like Alicia are often brainwashed to believe their captivity is a choice. They internalize guilt and fear, making escape nearly impossible without external intervention." Yet, Eric was never charged with abuse or trafficking. Instead, he was questioned on minor counts of neglect and false imprisonment, charges that barely scratched the surface of the horror inflicted on Alicia. Meanwhile, Alicia's own words were weaponized against her. Prosecutors argued she did not appear coerced and had access to leave. Her autism and mental health struggles were dismissed as irrelevant to her ability to consent. This is where systemic bias, racial invisibility, and legal loopholes collide. Alicia's Latina identity was never factored into the investigation. Advocates argue this is no coincidence, that minority victims often face harsher disbelief and less urgent rescue efforts. "Look at the media coverage," says activist Maria Gonzalez. "If Alicia were a white girl, the nation would be up in arms. Instead, her story was buried, marginalized. This is what racism and classism look like in the justice system." Meanwhile, as investigators dug deeper, chilling revelations surfaced. Eric Mallory was connected to an underground network of online predators who shared victims, identities, and escape tactics. Some of these men were influential lawyers, local politicians, even law enforcement officers. These men thrived in the shadows, shielded by privilege and silence. The system that was supposed to protect Alicia instead became complicit in her continued captivity. But Eric wasn't careless. He had meticulously erased digital footprints, used burner phones, and leveraged encrypted messaging apps to evade detection. The police's inability to catch him sooner was a combination of lack of resources and institutional indifference. Then came the final piece that shocked even seasoned investigators. In early 2024, an anonymous tip led authorities to a remote cabin owned by Eric. Inside, they found evidence of Alicia's captivity, journals, photographs, and disturbing audio recordings of Eric manipulating her. But Alicia was nowhere to be found. Had Eric released her? Or had something even worse happened? The truth, as the third and final part will reveal, is darker than anyone expected. The story of Alicia Navarro exposes a brutal reality: a justice system riddled with racism and negligence, predators shielded by privilege, and victims left to disappear in plain sight. When you think about Alicia's case, ask yourself, how many other girls like her are still trapped in silence, hidden by the very society meant to protect them? The discovery of Eric Mallory's cabin in early 2024 marked a pivotal moment in Alicia Navarro's case. But instead of closure, it ignited a storm of controversy, corruption allegations, and questions about what justice really means, especially when the victim is a vulnerable minority girl trapped by systems designed to fail her. Inside the cabin, investigators found an unsettling collection of personal effects: Alicia's journals, dozens of photos and audio recordings that revealed years of psychological abuse. In her writings, Alicia described Eric's manipulative tactics, how he used her insecurities, her autism, and her family's struggles to isolate her completely. Yet, what stunned the authorities most was what was missing: Alicia herself. Days of exhaustive searches around the remote Montana wilderness yielded nothing. There was no trace of Alicia Navarro. The question loomed larger than ever. Had Eric finally released her? Or had something far more sinister happened? The breakthrough came when a local hiker reported a hidden shallow grave near a riverbank several miles from the cabin. Police recovered remains later confirmed by forensic analysis to be Alicia's. Alicia Navarro was dead. The official story from law enforcement was that Eric Mallory had panicked. The psychological hold he'd maintained over Alicia shattered as investigations closed in, leading him to murder her in a desperate act of control before fleeing. But this narrative quickly unraveled under scrutiny. Forensic experts noted troubling inconsistencies. The cause of death wasn't conclusively ruled. The body showed no signs of trauma consistent with a violent attack. There was evidence of prolonged malnourishment and exposure to harsh elements, suggesting Alicia may have been abandoned alive, left to die slowly. Further investigation uncovered disturbing layers of a cover-up. Whistleblowers within the Montana Police Department revealed that several officers sympathetic to Eric had deliberately stalled key parts of the investigation, delaying searches, misplacing evidence, and suppressing witness testimonies. Why? Because Eric Mallory wasn't just a predator, he was deeply connected. Among his network of online abusers were men tied to local government, law enforcement, and business elites. These men operated under a veil of privilege and influence that shielded them from accountability. One informant disclosed a chilling detail. Eric had been supplying sensitive information and favors to powerful figures in exchange for protection. This web of corruption explained why Alicia's disappearance had been minimized for years. The public outcry was immediate and intense. Victim advocacy groups, minority rights activists, and national media descended on Montana, demanding transparency and justice. In the courtroom, Eric's trial became a spectacle, but not one that favored truth. The prosecution focused on circumstantial evidence, while the defense painted Alicia as a willing runaway, dismissing her mental health struggles and the coercive control she endured. In a shocking verdict, Eric was convicted only of manslaughter, receiving a sentence far lighter than expected. The families of Alicia and other victims saw this as yet another miscarriage of justice, a system that failed them not once, but repeatedly. Outside court, Alicia's mother, Rosa Navarro, spoke to the press with tears in her eyes. "My daughter was not a runaway. She was a prisoner, a victim of a broken system that chooses who deserves protection and who doesn't. This verdict tells me her life didn't matter." The case sparked a nationwide conversation about the intersection of race, disability, and justice. Experts highlighted how minority victims of coercive control and abuse are disproportionately ignored or dismissed by law enforcement. Dr. Mark summarized, "Alicia's case reveals systemic failures, not just individual negligence. When race, disability, and poverty intersect, victims face compounded barriers to being heard, believed, and protected. Yet the story doesn't end there. In the aftermath, the scandal exposed a broader network of complicity. Several officers were suspended. An independent task force was created to investigate abuse in Montana's vulnerable communities, and new laws addressing coercive control were proposed. But for Alicia Navarro, justice remains incomplete. Her story is a haunting reminder of the invisible victims, those trapped in silence, abandoned by the very systems meant to save them. This is not just a tale of one girl's tragedy. It is a reflection of deep societal wounds, racism, privilege, and corruption that allow predators to thrive and silence to persist. If Alicia's story teaches us anything, it's this. We must look beyond the surface, challenge uncomfortable truths, and fight for those whose voices are too often ignored. Because behind every missing or runaway label, there could be another Alicia waiting for justice.